Hey, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Embellish Podcast, a podcast focused on product stories, product storytellers, interesting brand ambassadors, and any other thing that we happen to come up with. Whether you're a bourbon fan, geek, casual observer, or someone just floating through the channel, I hope you find it interesting. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com, and I'll try to get that taken care of. I also generally live stream the recording of these episodes on YouTube whenever we have them scheduled. You can find that information on Instagram or on my website or on any social media platform. You can also find all of my links on Instagram at EmbellishPod or Twitter with the exact same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's also a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today is July the 28th, and we are talking with Martin and Jonah from Bespoken Spirits. Thank you guys for joining me. And Martin, I'll give you an opportunity to pronounce your last name, and then I will not mention it again.
Thank you, John. My name is Martin Janousek. So come from Czech Republic actually. So I was born in Pilsen. That's where the name comes from, and of course I brew my own beer because of that.
Mm-hmm. So
thanks for having us.
You work for, with, and own Bespoken Spirits, and you started a brand from nothing, which is kind of a daunting task to begin with. But you don't necessarily come from the whiskey tradition, which is kind of a thing that happens on a regular basis, where these people that are steeped in whiskey or bourbon or whatever tradition, like, oh, well, I've got a namesake, so you're already like running uphill. Like, what puts you in a position where you're like, I'm going to start a whiskey brand with almost nothing other than my sheer willpower?
I appreciate that you appreciate how tough it is to build a brand, and if I would have had any idea about it, but at the end of the day, it was really passion, and then sort of what I've done for the past 25 years. So it's a little bit about my background. Other than that, I brew my own beer. Is that actually I grew up in Germany. Born in Czech Republic, grew up in Germany, spent there about like 25, 26 years, got a PhD in material science, and then I came to Silicon Valley to work in a couple of startups, and after 25 years, right, working as a VP of technology for a 3D printing company here or there, or a fuel cell company. I just really wanted to do something where I felt like the experience that I gathered from a material science point, from a process point, really wanted to connect it with something that I really like. I like eating. You can't see, but I love eating. I love drinking, and so wine and spirits have been always a passion. And probably part of it also a midlife crisis, where I really wanted to do something that you really enjoy. And it's 3 p.m. now here and in California, and I think where else can you drink on the job without being called an alcoholic? So that's kind of what started this.
Kentucky's where you can drink on the job and not be called an alcoholic, because it's like the birthplace of bourbon. It's the center of all things, and it's really centered around Bardstown specifically. When you kind of get outside that ecosystem, then some of the religious nature comes in, and you're never ever supposed to drink. So it's like this weird dichotomy that exists. But you're talking about the things that you've done in the past, and it feels like maybe I'm wrong here, but it feels like you have a career of operating within like disruptive behaviors in marketplaces, right? So looking at, materials handling or 3D printing, like all these things are considered disruptors. Like, is that who you are? Like, are you that kind of person where you're like, let's find a way to change whatever segment I'm working in?
I'm not sure I would call myself like that, but probably the rest of my family and everybody. And I was also lucky, right? You gotta have to get the opportunity to do something disruptive, right? And I was fortunate, starting with my PhD thesis, and then every single job that I had after that, I always did something around innovation, right? Which means like usually finding new materials for new applications for aerospace. What actually brought me here was a program to Mars, right? An oxygen generator originally that was supposed to be launched for Mars. So I guess yes, and I think that's where I also saw that huge value in trying to get into the spirits industry with a different approach that we're using, right? That people would consider non-traditional. But hopefully, after we talk this a little bit about it, you're gonna see that we use only the traditional components, right? No additives, nothing.
Yeah, and I love the idea of challenging tradition, because oftentimes, and I tell this story at work all of the time. There's a story of this woman who's setting out. She's going to bake a ham for Thanksgiving, and so she pulls the ham out of the refrigerator and she cuts off both ends of the ham. She puts it in the pan and she's getting ready to bake it. And her child looks at her and says, "Hey, why'd you cut the ends off the ham before you put it in the oven?" And the woman's like, I don't know. It's my mom taught me how to make this. And so they're like, okay. So they go and they ask grandmother, like, "Hey, grandmother, why do you cut the ends off the pan?" And she's like, "I don't know. My mom told me the same thing." And, they're in a lucky position where great grandmother's still alive. And so they go and they talk to great grandmother and they're like, "Hey, why do you cut the ends off the ham before you bake it?" And she said, "Well, because whenever I was baking ham, the pan was only this big and the ham was this big. So I had to cut the ends off." So sometimes tradition is just born out of necessity in the past, and then you would sort of adhere to it. But I would challenge, you said, lucky, but if you want to be a true disruptor, like lucky, you can probably get away with that once, but there's some sort of a talent that comes into play if you're doing it multiple times over and over. It's a skill, it's a talent, it's a thing that you've kind of built forward. But how disruptive do you want to be? Like what's the end goal of disrupting the whiskey marketplace? Are you trying to turn it on its ear or just do something new?
With I target, sorry, can you repeat it?
So what is the ultimate goal? Like, are you really wanting to turn whiskey industry on its ear, or you just want to do something new and different? Like how disruptive are you trying to be, or do you don't know? You're just trying to do something fun.
Yeah. No, but I definitely want to have some fun, right? But the whole idea is really, and not to be, we really see what we do is more like an addition, right, to the traditional way of making whiskeys, right? And then once we talk a bit about it, right, we're really focusing on the maturation part. And what we want to do is we want to bring process control science into the maturation part of spirits, right? We don't distill ourselves, right? So we really see it as an opportunity for doing things differently. Doesn't have to be for all kinds of spirits, right? But it enables a lot for our brand. But also we have a second leg of a business where we do maturation as a service, right? And that enables a lot of people to start with one base spirit, right, but develop it in completely different areas. So we see ourselves as an addition to the industry rather than a substitution of what people are doing.
Okay. And so you've mentioned a couple of times, you have this focus on sort of, I don't want to say hacking, but adding to the traditional concepts of maturation. So what is it that you are doing that is, shareable, that is different? I'm not asking for, trade secrets or, the specifics of it, but like what are you guys doing that's different? Because, I see this quote, you use less than 3% of the wood that is traditionally used in aging. How do you get there?
Yeah. So tough one. Definitely need to figure out where to start, because on one hand it's really simple, and the other it's really complicated. But it was all about, John. It was all about understanding, trying to understand the sort of the journey to understanding what is actually happening during maturation, right? What are the components? And we're actually lucky because we only have the spirit, and we have the wood, and then we have the environment. Right, so kind of three input variables, so you kind of think it from a process point of view, right? And then it's about understanding what each of these three components is contributing, right? What is coming from the spirit, right? What is coming from the wood, and in particular with the wood, right? How can we treat the wood, whether that's toasting, whether that's charring, and we do all these things in house because we put a lot of attention onto how we toast, what precise temperatures for exactly for how long, what atmospheres we're using, and the same is true for how we source our the wood. That we need to be very particular in sorting the wood, characterizing the wood, because one of the big variations that comes in barrel aging, right, why we're able to sell single barrels, right, one better than the other, is because a lot of these barrels are different, right, which a lot comes either from the starting wood or comes from the treatment, how it was treated, how it was charred, how it was toasted. And our idea was from the beginning, we need to understand how these different three components impact the aroma, taste, and color of a spirit. And once we understand what is happening, then we should be able to control those. So the name Bespoken comes from the idea to be able to really, once you understand and once you're able to control the maturation process, you should be able to customize the spirit towards the fantasies, any direction you want to take it to. And our process takes about 4 days, which is a huge advantage when it comes to learning cycles. And that's sort of where my engineering background comes in. I realized if we can really learn within 4 days, when we treat a piece of wood, when we try different types of wood, when we try different distillates with different combinations of wood, right, and I can get a results within 4 days rather than 4 years, right, you have a huge learning advantage against over the traditional process, which enables you to really convert this, to your point, right? So the cutting the ham is kind of an experience, right? It was not based on knowledge, but it was experience, right? And sort of what I'm hoping to do is kind of bring or transfer the experience-driven industry right into a knowledge-driven industry or approach.
So you mentioned in there, kind of the speed to understand. This is the thing that's always been sort of magical to me in the distilling industry is, a distiller comes up with a new idea for a mash bill, and then they go out and they try it out. And this is something that, Jim Beam was doing in the, early 2000s, or even before that in the late 90s, when nobody wanted whiskey. They were going out and trying new things. They were making rice-based bourbon, and they were doing all of these unique things, trying to find a way to kind of get there. But they had no idea if it was ever going to be good, right? Like they made the thing, what the base distillate tastes like, and you're like, I think it's going to be okay. But then you put it into a barrel and you hope that it doesn't come out tasting like hot garbage. So when you're talking about what you're doing here, your advanced aging technique, is this doing this at scale, or are you testing out the theory and then okay, we can take this hypothesis and put it in barrels and get it to market based off of like testing the hypothesis? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I understand the question. Yeah, so actually we do both, right? We do in the lab, and we typically actually only use like 4-ounce samples, most of our samples and experiments in the lab. And you have to think about it, when we start a series of experiments, we have like 30, 40 different combinations, but we can also do that on scale, right? We have a huge capacity and producing 10,000s, right? 10,000s of cases a year, right? So we do this. We use it for development of the recipe, but then also for the production part.
So whenever you scale from the 4-ounce experiment up to the thousands of gallons or whatever you happen to do, does it always turn out the exact same way? Like, are you getting that degree of specificity in your output that like it just never varies, or is there still some slight variation that occurs?
No, and that was sort of when I talked about we need to understand what's happening, right? We need to understand how those different components contribute, right? So that was also the first thing we had to prove it in the first 2 or 3 years, right? Can we scale from what literally started in my garage 10 feet from here, right? Can we scale this? And based on anything that we can measure, you know how it is with tasting, right? I give you 3 spirits, I tell you, one of them I think is the best, right? And and actually they are the same. And I'm sure you're gonna pick one of those 3 and say, yes, I agree with you. This one's really better.
Right.
So, but based on anything we can measure, right, today, and based on the tasting panel and training the tasting panel for these comparisons, they turn out the way they were supposed to be. Otherwise it's difficult, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I didn't know if you were like just, we're 1% off of the original variation, but that's pretty impressive to be able to take a 4-ounce test sample, scale it up, because even in, major manufacturing industries,
Oh
they'll
yeah,
go from
yeah.
their proof of concept to the actual end product, and they
Hmm.
allow a variance. Either they allow a 5% variance, or whatever. That's
Yeah.
really, really interesting, but I guess it makes sense for your background and what you have
Yeah,
done
no, and John,
historically.
I would be lying if we didn't have problems early on, right, till we figured
Mhm.
out, because you scale certain things, you think you can just scale them, but then they have an impact on the atmosphere, right, and all kinds of
Mhm.
things change. But yeah, but the process development is made that way that we can scale it.
All right, I got to dig through here because I've got like 47 different ways
Yeah.
that I can go through this. So one of the things I want to mention specifically is that you guys provided me with a couple of samples. We have a rye and I have the straight bourbon. And I told you when we were kind of before we started up, I'm reluctant to give any tasting notes because I had a situation that impacts my ability to taste things appropriately about 2 weeks ago, and so. We already had the schedule, and I didn't want to try to reschedule on you guys or anything, but I'm going to come back to these. I've already tasted, and I have my impressions. I think most of my taste buds are back, but I don't want to be like, oh, well, this tastes slightly off for me. And then, 2 weeks from now, I'm like, oh, no, this is way better than it was 2 weeks ago for me. But in going through them, I spent a little bit of time on the website that you guys have created, which is a beautiful website. I find sometimes you have sort of two categories that exist in whiskey websites. They're either awful or they're great, and that is the only thing that exists. And you guys are in that situation. But one thing I
I'm
knew I
glad to hear
could
that.
do is you have a lot of pairings, which is a unique thing to do. Not a ton of people are
Yeah.
putting out pairings or cocktails. Like those are always afterthoughts for
Hmm.
most whiskey companies because they want the whiskey to stand on its own. And so I actually took some
Yeah.
time because those are things I felt like I could trust. Like, oh, I know what apple pie tastes like, and I can see how this
Hmm.
kind of impacts
Hmm.
whatever. And so with the bourbon, the two things that you guys put on the website, or not two of the things that I looked at, was doing truffles or doing apple pie. I have a little apple pie and kind of tasted it along with it, and it was fantastic. Like the bourbon itself tastes like a 94 proof bourbon. That's the first thing for me is
Hmm.
that I catch myself
Hmm.
getting caught up in things that are either 13 years old or 130 proof, and so coming down to 94 proof sometimes tastes thinner, but it's still really, really good. But whenever I paired it with the truffle, you guys had put one on there. I went and picked up truffle. It sort of tasted like a really high end, like chocolate liqueur filled chocolate. Like you get those around the holidays. They've got a little
Nice.
bit of liqueur in them, but they're really, really nice.
Hmm.
The one you might buy for your boss for a Christmas present, like, oh, I'm going to get a package of these to give to him or whatever, is what it came out with. It was delicious.
Like, I'm glad you love it and you like it, and the pairing is something that is so important to me,
Mhm.
because I actually was shocked, right, that we do all these wine pairings, right? You eat your oysters, right? You have to have Chablis with it, right, or maybe
Mhm.
champagne, right? Even it's more or less same region, right? Then, right, you have your mushroom risotto, right? You have to have a Pinot with it, right? And then you move to your steak, right? And you have a Syrah or a Cab or whatever, right? But up to recently, right, people have not really thought about pairing spirits with food, right? It's always either pre-thought in your cocktail when you come to a restaurant, or
Mhm.
afterwards to sit at the fire pit with a cigar. And we actually try to do this a lot. We try to do over Zoom, thanks to
Mhm.
COVID, we're a little bit limited, where we did a lot of chocolate pairings
Mhm.
working with a local chocolatier, right, trying to figure out what pairings work well, right, for the different spirits. And then we do it a lot with restaurants here in California, where we actually work with the chef and they come up with a 5 to 7 course menu, where they pair the spirits with every course, and people are
Mhm.
just blown away. And I have to admit, I was so blown away when we did it the first time ourselves. I believe it was the most amazing experience I had myself. And first people are kind of like, what, I'm gonna have whiskey with my food? But once you do
Mhm.
it, it's just
It makes
incredible. And
sense.
so I'm glad you tried some of the pairings. And nothing is so much depends on your own
Mhm.
preferences, of course, right? If you don't like truffle like my dad, right, I probably wouldn't tell him to try with our whiskey.
Right.
But
No, I'm definitely we're truffle fans here, and I know the rest of the truffles are probably being eaten by my children right now, because I brought them home and kind of tasted through it after lunch today, and they're downstairs alone with them. I know they're gone,
Oh,
but
oh
it
yeah,
was
they're
a
not.
thing that definitely is going to connect for us, and you're very much you're right on to something. Is this idea of pairing whiskey is a relatively new concept, and I've been baffled by this as well because I came to whiskey like I was born and raised in Kentucky, and so bourbon has always been a thing that's around me. But when I first started appreciating food and beverages, it started with wine. There was a movie that came out in the '90s called Sideways, and I was talking to a guy about this last week, and he had it's about this character Paul Giamatti plays, and you may have seen the movie, but he's really
Oh
into
yeah, of
Pinot Noir,
course.
like that's his thing, and I watched the movie and I was like I am the person that wants to be that attached to my food and beverage and things that I consume.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh no, now I've got to do this. But being in rural Western Kentucky is not really conducive to like getting good, hard to find, or better than just cheap wine. A lot of Sutter
Hmm.
Home around
Yeah.
here, a lot of, you know, Barefoot
Yeah.
or whatever you happen to be. And those all serve a purpose, but that's where you start. Like you start with wine and you're like, okay, well, this wine goes with this particular type of food and this wine goes with this type of food.
Yeah.
And that's never been a huge consideration. There was Peggy Noe Stevens was pushing it some years ago, but it just
Hmm.
never get any traction because you're exactly right. It's the let's sit and have a cigar, or let's we've already eaten our meal, now it's time to drink whiskey. But
Yeah.
more recently people are pairing, and it's great. It's
Hmm.
great to see that. And so far the pairings that you guys put together for the bourbon and for the rye both seem very, very, very appropriate, and
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
I was very interested in that because like I said, most people are not going down that path. They're having their whiskey and
Yeah.
they're like, it's a whiskey.
Hmm.
You make sure you drink a bunch of water beforehand. Don't eat anything else because it'll impact your flavor buds. It's that super pretentious nature that they're trying to pick up.
And you can
And
still do
it's
it,
interesting.
right?
Yeah.
Either you can still do it, right? But what helps
Hmm.
us a little bit, I have to admit, John, is right the variety of spirits that we have. Right, we talked
Hmm.
about the straight, you talked about the rye. We have something we call a Japanese style whiskey, right? Super floral, super fruity, super light. If you haven't had this, let me know. It's one of my favorite. Right, it's so different, right? And we have our original batch, right, which is
Hmm.
again right same mash bill actually, but has just is much more caramel vanilla driven, right, which then
Hmm.
enables you actually to do these different pairings, right, or like our American light whiskey, which is like sweet honey, almond, marzipan, right? So because they're
Hmm.
so different in their characteristics, you can actually start pairing them with very different food, right? Because otherwise, if you have one expression, it's hard to say, yeah, it matches five different courses. So that's been
Right.
something, even like our rum that we're making, right? That is just beautiful. But
Yeah, and I had on here a list. We've got bourbon, we've got more than one kind of bourbon, but you've got bourbon, you've got rye, you've got light whiskey, you've got rum, and then you have the special batch,
mhm,
which was the one that caught me. Like I saw the special batch whenever I was kind of poking through and doing
mm,
the research, and I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And I look at like Japanese. I'm like, "Oh, that's super, even like even
yes.
more interesting." Do you have any other categories you're targeting? Like, have you looked at doing like an American single malt or anything along that lines, or?
Yeah. We're actually working with a local distillery on a mesquite smoked malt whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned earlier that we don't distill ourselves, right? So working in some cases work with the big guys, in some cases with the small guys, and we're trying to actually implement more and more of those special batches where we work with more and more local distilleries. Like our rum comes actually out of Huntington Beach, right? Also
Mm-hmm.
from California, and the next one most likely is gonna be like a mesquite smoked malt whiskey.
And are you allowed to talk about what brand you're working with, or do you have NDAs on those?
Oh, I
I you
probably
don't
should
you
ask. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I don't want to, like I said, if I ask a question, you're like,
Because
"Ah,
we
I
do
can't
have
answer that. You just
NDAs,
like,
but I'm always like, why would you not want us to mention? But I should first ask. So yeah,
right, yeah, no, that makes sense. But
but we
and
only
the
have
main
like
reason,
California.
go ahead.
You know, sorry.
The main reason I asked is because I was talking to a guy who's written some wine books last week on an episode. His name's Michael Juergens, but he also has SoCal Rum Company in California, and then he's also working on Bhutan Wine Company in Bhutan, the country, that's out in the Himalayas or whatever. And I was like,
Wow.
you may be a direct competitor with him now, or you might be consuming some of his whiskey to be able to make. And then it also mentioned on the website that you're doing some prototyping of whiskey ideas for major distillers. You can't share those, but that was, I don't know, it was on the website or in an article that I read, one or the other.
Yeah, it's true. So our second leg of the business is what we call maturation as a service, where we work with distillers, rectifiers, grocery chains, right, that want to have their own white labeled product, right? And this can be in any category, right? We can apply this. I mentioned that we do rum, right? We talked about malt whiskey. We've made excellent brandy. We've made a tequila that won double gold in San Francisco. We're working on a mezcal project where we start with the starting spirit from the customer, right? Very often it's actually already aged, John, right? We were surprised how often people come with a 4-year, 5-year, 6-year-old product and they are not happy with it, right? And they want us to move it towards a different tasting profile. And so that's actually about 50% of our business. And the beauty with this is that because it's so important for us that we have these learning cycles, right? And there are probably not that many companies out there who have worked with hundreds of different starting spirits, right? And you think about the big guys, right? I have no idea how many different distillates they work with, right? But we know a lot of the big guys probably have 1, 2, 3 different ones.
Yep.
Right. So the beauty for us is because we have the capability or the possibility to work with so many different starting spirits, right? We're learning a lot about the distillate itself, right? What needs to be in the distillate to get to a certain end profile. Because kind of back to the original thing, right? If you're looking for a specific profile on the spirit, if in some cases, right, if you don't have it in the starting spirit, right, you'll never get to it in the end because either there's an oxidation reactions where it takes part, or it's an esterification reaction where something reacts from the spirit with something that comes out of the barrel. And if it's not there, right, you're never gonna get it. And this is again the big advantage of our learning cycles, that we learn so much about the distillate at the same time as we learn about the maturation process, and how critical both of them are to get to a specific spirit profile.
So I want to make sure I capture this appropriately. It sounded like you said in there that folks will show up, some distilleries might show up with what might be considered substandard or off profile or something that they don't really want, and they're having you sort of shift it in a different direction. So you may be saving something that might have ended up being dumped out. Is that a correct statement? Like
Yeah. Either dumped out or they sell it to somebody else.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Or they
they're
have to
passing it
sell
off.
it
They're not going
for
to put it in their main flavor profiles or do anything
yeah.
with, and they have a choice of how do we get rid of it, but you're able to potentially save it for them.
Yeah. And some of it, I think, is John, is also either in some cases it's because also the consumer has changed over the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years, right? And things you might have put down, right, based on consumer preferences that were 5 or 10 years ago. Right. It probably won't happen in your standard bourbon category, but some of the other categories, especially where people were exploring, experimenting, or especially new distillers, right? New craft distillers who didn't have the experience, right? For them, it's really, really tough. If they had a brandy company, they had it 5 years in the barrel, and they said, well, I either bring it to Martin and his team, right, and I'll know within a week whether I like it, or I have to wait another 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, right? There was a lady. She said, "I don't know, so I rather try you guys."
So I did have one question about this particular bourbon, and maybe you can't disclose. Is this a high, what would be considered a high rye mash bill on this bourbon?
Yeah, 21 rye.
Oh, okay, you can disclose. I didn't know if you knew it or not. Because
Yeah.
I didn't poke around for mash bills at all. Like I usually do that, but I just didn't today. And it's really good. I mean, I enjoy a high rye mash bill because everybody who's looking for some spice or some proof or whatever, like it gives you a little more, kind of kick to it. Now I gotta look at. So whenever you kind of going back, we had somebody that was in chat that asked a question, but then they answered their own question because they were like, "Hey, what do I need to look for pairing bourbon?" And then they went to your website and they found what they were looking for, right? So they got their own answer.
nice.
But who makes the pairings? Like, do you do this? Do you have a sensory panel? If you have somebody hired, like, how do you get to these pairings?
We do it. We have a sensory panel. And then to your point, right, a lot of people like it. So I still don't believe there's only one way of doing certain things, right? So we kind of take the feedback from the internal and also external sensory panel of what they're suggesting. And in some cases, it's also working with the chefs, like with the chocolate, where with the chocolatiers, right? They actually, right after we supply them, because they're the experts on chocolate. I love chocolate,
Right.
but I wouldn't call myself an expert, right? And also tasting chocolate, right? And then so together with them, we kind of went through and tried different truffles, right? And then decided, yeah, this one pairs beautifully here and the other. And it's hard to say, right? In some cases, you can't say, right, this really tastes awful with something else, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's an occasion where that can happen for individuals. Just the flavors don't hit you particularly right.
And
It just sort of happens.
And I would highly recommend, right, next time you just have a couple of people over, right, just try things, right, try different types of chocolate, right, even if you only have 2 different types of chocolate at home, right, or different ice cream, right, or whatever it is, just try yourself, right, and just the experience, the enjoyment together with friends, right. And I know I'm stealing this from somewhere else, right, but you should always drink whiskey with friends, right, because that's the way. And if you then can pair it with food, right, and maybe not just a dessert or something sweet, then I think the experience is even more
You're not wrong.
exciting.
Brown spirits are generally better consumed in company. That's where I've always been. Like whether it's like an aged rum or a whiskey of any type, or even some aged tequilas, like those are all things that they're contemplative, they're communal, they're all of those things that sort of bring people together. But it does kind of get you to that point to where you can say, oh, like we can all three taste this and we can see how things are different. And that's I love tastings for being able to hear what other people think. I hate with tastings that are, pretentious, and it's like, oh, well, you should be tasting these 5 things. Well, if I've, you mentioned marzipan earlier, right? A lot of people have never had marzipan, so they can't taste it. They've never had it before in their life. They don't know what that is. Or currants, like a currants is another one that people will bring up on a regular basis. Like currants don't grow in the United States. You might have had currant jelly, which is a different flavor than that. But hearing how people react to whiskey is it's really fun. It's an interesting experience that kind of comes along. So I wanted to go back to this quote that I got from the website. You're mapping the spirit genome, right? This is a thing off of the website. And you've talked a little bit about that, but could you expand on that a little more? Like what that specifically means? You're getting down to flavor profiles or to chemical structures, or like what does that mean?
Yeah. Please stop me if I get too far down
You won't, man.
the web.
This is the right place for that.
And
We're the ones that go. Yeah, let's go as deep as you want to go. I'm the one.
So when we talk about this, it's really about understanding, right? How is the spirit made of, right? So when we start with the starting spirit, we call it a fingerprint, right? We take a chemical fingerprint of the starting spirit, right? We typically focus somewhere around 250, maybe 300 components, right? That we have identified, that others have identified, right? That people consider critical for instance, for a bourbon. Right. Usually the starting spirit actually has significantly less of them. Right. And then we compare it with after the maturation process. Right. So we take again a chemical fingerprint, right? And then we analyze what has actually happened. And the crazy part is, right, you could have never done this 20, 30 years ago because we didn't have even though I'm getting old, but I'm still going to say 30 years ago, we didn't have the computer power. Right now, you can think suddenly there are like hundreds of reactions that are taking place. Right, you're trying to figure out what happened. Right, to component A, where is it now? Right, in your end result. Right, so a lot of what we are doing is data science. Right, to try to understand what happened with the help of the help of the chemistry, right? And once we kind of look at before and after, right, then we build these models and correlations with when we treat, when we toast, when we char, when we use different types of woods, when we use a different temperature, different atmosphere, right? How does that actually impact all these different components, so that we kind of have levers when we're looking for a specific profile, right? What are the levers that we have to, in parentheses, turn, right? That we get to more vanilla, right? That we get to more banana, right? That we get to more uh, the ripe apple, right? And the apple pie thing is a good example, right? A lot of people get actually apple pie, actually even from the straight bourbon that we make. So it's really the when we talk about this, it's really about understanding the fingerprints, right, of the composition of the spirit before and after the maturation process, and then being able to make conclusions on how to treat the wood, etc. And we call this craft maturation, right? Because we're putting so much craft into understanding, into treating, right, highly precisely, right, the wood, and then also the maturation, just like people do, I believe, in distillation, also fermentation, right? We know today so much more about the impact of yeast, right, which people didn't know 100 years ago. Nobody cared about, right? We were all using spirits yeast, right, or distiller's yeast, right, to make whiskey. But people are starting to understand all these things, and that's as crucial as what we do.
Yeah, it's thinking about Pat Heist at Wilderness Trail. They've got 10,000 plus different yeast strains that they're holding on to and doing some expansion on. And I was talking with a distiller out of Indiana, and he does a lot of wild capture yeast to try to go to old distilling sites and see if he can capture ancestry yeast of what was there whenever they were actually making the whiskey, because that's what you did. Like 150 years ago, to make whiskey, you had to capture yeast from somewhere. And what was interesting to me, during the pandemic, everybody started making sourdough bread, right? Like just making it in their homes or doing whatever. They were capturing yeast. That's exact. They were doing wild capture of yeast. But you said in here craft maturation, and I love the term craft, but it's at this point, at least in my impression, within the whiskey industry, where craft is sort of has this like, it's an identifier that people are like, oh, well, that's just craft, right? But there's this bigger category. It's these people that are really focusing on intentionality and what they're doing. You're doing craft maturation, but going back to that 3% of wood, you're using 3% of the normal amount of wood. We know that bourbon requires to be in a new oak container. How do you get to being able to honor that new oak container but use 3% of the wood?
Yeah. Good point. And so we should always say it's up to 30%, so 30 times less, right? From our 7 SKUs that we have today, right, we can only claim that for 4 out of those 7, right? Because to your point, right, thanks to the TDB, whoever came up with those laws, right, the spirit has to be in the barrel first, right? And it was never really our intention originally, but if you want to compete with the best out there, right, like you want to compete with the big guys, right, and you want to compete in the straight bourbon category, right, and you want to show, because that's what most people care about, or the rye category, like our straight, who won twice in a row now, double gold in San Francisco, right? We have to kind of put it in the barrel first. Yeah.
Okay, so that sort of answers that question that I was kind of having around that. And I work in ag technology, and so the term sustainability gets tossed around a ton, and being cognizant of the resources we consume in making things is very, very important. Like how much wood is being used, how much water is being used, where does the waste go after the fact, like all of the distiller's waste. Like there are projects in Kentucky on a regular basis that are like, what do we do with the millions of gallons of distiller's waste that we have every single year? Because there's only so many cows in this state that will eat spent distiller's yeast or spent distiller's grain. Like that, we don't have enough animals to consume it. What do we do with it? But you guys focus pretty heavily, or have a lot of sort of documentation around sustainability. What does that mean for a brand like Bespoken Spirits? Like, how do you guys impact sustainability?
Yeah, we kind of look at our entire process, right? Other than that, I also drive a Prius, right? I can't
Mhm.
afford a full electric yet, but hopefully one day, right? We look at the entire process, and kind of to your point, so that the wood consumption is one part, right? The next one is electricity, right? Or the energy that it takes, right, for the maturation
Mhm.
process, right? Because our process is so short, right? We're estimating it somewhere to be literally only in the 1 or 2%, right, of what you would traditionally need, right? Especially if you start heating some of those rig houses, right? All the people that have to move things, right, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also, the angel share is a really interesting one, right? Because we have some loss of spirit to the wood because the wood soaks it up, right? But it's at we don't lose 20, 25, 30, depending on how long you actually mature the spirit, right? And if you when you actually look at that part, that you could reduce your CO2, right, footprint by 20, 30% for your entire process chain, right? Because you're literally losing this, right? That is
Mhm.
actually the biggest contributor to the CO2 footprint that you have. And going forward, we're looking for more and more initiatives that we want to do, right? Hopefully, one day of being carbon neutral and all these things. We're still a relatively small company and relatively young, right? This is sort of our second year where we're actually selling with the distributor over the US. We are now in eight states in the US. Of course, with focus on California and also Florida.
So you mentioned something I probably should have asked this like right off the rip at the very beginning of this. Is there a place where I can go buy this online? So if I'm not in a place where I've got local distributorship,
Yeah,
where should I be
yeah.
going to buy this? Because people want this.
So you know that I'm not allowed to mention only one, right? So I think you have to mention at least a couple of them. But
Right.
the easiest might be actually, and the most legally correct answer is probably if you wanna, unless you wanna support. So yeah. So go to our website first,
Mhm.
and then wherever you live, you can type in your area code or your town, and then you can see if there's a local store, a local
Mhm.
bar. And should you not find somebody local, right, then you can order through our website, right, through a third party, right? You can order, and I think there's a flat rate of $15, but don't cite me on that,
Mhm.
right? And then you can get it
Yeah,
almost
you don't.
everywhere in the
We won't
US.
hang you on the cost of it. Just like where can I go to pick this up? Because now I also know like
Yeah,
I've got to. So go
but
rewinding a little bit, right? You mentioned the
mhm.
special batch. Is the special batch on your website, or is it some like because I have to go
Yes,
find
yes,
this
you
now.
can.
I have to be able to get one and to have it in my house because I'm interested in what you're
Yes,
doing with Japanese whiskey. But it is on the website as well.
yeah. Yes, and you can also go, maybe that's also a good recommendation. Go to winesearcher.com, right? And
Hmm.
as you know, they also have spirits, and there you'll
Yep.
find who actually offers it online, and you're going to find a couple of them. The safest is definitely through the website because some
Hmm.
of the retailers might claim they have it and then they don't have
They
it,
don't
depending
actually.
on how good they are really with their inventory monitoring. But so the
Right.
safest, if you're looking for a particular one, it's the website. Yeah.
And there are, and I won't name any names, but there are several websites that don't actually ever have any inventory, and they actually sell. They resell something that they'll get from another website, or they'll find a local retailer that has it, and so they don't
Oh yeah.
actually have stock at all. I've had this happen before where I ordered something
Yeah.
from another state because there was not availability at a local retailer, doesn't have distribution in Kentucky, and they held on to the order for like 3 months, and then they're like, "Oh, well, we can't actually get this product. The supplier we were going to get it from, which I found out was another
Mhm.
store,
Yeah.
just didn't have it. Because they hadn't updated their
Mhm.
online inventory or something along that lines." So you go to bespokenspirits.com. That's the place where you want to be
Yep.
to sort of start off with in a journey to be
And
able to
if
pick up whatever there
yeah,
is.
yeah, if anybody of your listeners or viewers, right, has issues, please reach out to me at info@bespoken.com, right, and we'll figure out a way.
So what you guys are doing, there's been a ton of companies that have attempted accelerated aging and with mixed results. Do you consider this accelerated aging or just a different aging, alternative aging?
Yeah, for us, the acceleration part, right, is really an enabler to what we
Mhm.
wanted to do, right, to the customization part, right. It's really an enabler, and it's not just the acceleration part, right, because if what what we believe a lot of people have tried in the past, right, was taking a product from a point A to a product to a point B, right, on a
Mhm.
time scale, right. For us, it's really taking it, and I'm stealing this from my co-founders too, right, taking it from A to B, C, D, F, G, right, you name it, right, in all
Mhm.
kinds. It's not just about taking it on the timeline, right, but it's really completely, I mean, changing whether that's the color, whether that's the characteristic, whether that's the
Mhm.
mouthfeel, right. So for us, the to be able to do what we are doing, we have to do it fast, because otherwise we won't get the learning cycles, right, we won't understand the chemistry, right, we need the precision, and so for us, we consider it more like a tool, right, to be able to
Mhm.
what we want to do.
Okay. So you've got a co-founder, Stu, who's a part of this, and you guys have been doing this for 2 years. So,
That's
are you
been
doing?
5 years on my end.
Oh, it's been so has he only been
Oh
a part
yeah.
of this for 2 years? So he hasn't suffered as long as you? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
spent
is
two
this
years
all
in
that
my
you do?
garage.
Like,
Yeah.
are you 100% of Bespoken Spirits, or
Oh
do you
yeah.
still like
Oh
carry
yeah.
another job
No,
too?
no, 100% for five
That's good.
years.
That's
And
that's
I had
that's
my
scary.
first investor meetings in the garage. My wife had to give away half of the garage. I still used her washers to store equipment and everything, and
Mhm.
had to run power cords through the whole house. She hated that. Was a hazard, but I think we're good again.
Yeah, sometimes I started this podcast just so I could excuse having a bunch of bottles to my wife. Like I was like, like I got to have a reason to have these now. I'm like, I'll just start a
Good
podcast,
point.
because the world doesn't need another whiskey podcast or YouTube channel. Like that's not a thing that's needed, but I needed an
Yeah,
excuse, and so that was how I did it. You have a whiskey brand, which is
yeah,
maybe that's the thing. I need to tell my wife I should start a whiskey brand. She'll love that idea. Um,
yeah.
so
You
you
also had the rye, right? Have
Yeah, no,
you
I was
have
actually
you tried
drinking
the
through
rye?
that just a second
Oh,
ago.
okay.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's
sorry.
the so going back to the pairings, right? So that same truffle that I had with the bourbon that made it taste like a liqueur, with the rye, it came out more like. Have you had a truffle where they've done like chili in it, like a Thai chili or some other type of spicy chili that kind of accentuates that dark chocolate flavor that exists? That's what came out for me whenever I paired it up, and then when I put it with the apple
I see.
pie, it became like if you go to a really nice restaurant that tries to make an apple pie where they're adding in nutmeg and baking spice and doing all these other things to kind of
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
like punch up what an apple pie is. This did that, but then I backed off of it and waited a little while and just tried the rye itself. And obviously, I want to hit it again in a couple of weeks when my palate
Yeah.
is maybe back to where it should be. This is really, really good. And I told you before we started, this was one that surprised me mainly because you've got a straight rye over here that's aged at least 2 years, or sorry, a straight bourbon that's aged at least 2 years. We have some connotations of what 2 years means for whiskey drinkers, but whenever I look at 3 months, my brain automatically flips to this idea of like,
Hmm.
this is not going
Yeah.
to be good. And it was really good. Like I was very impressed with what came out of this alone, and I can only imagine it'll get better as my palate gets better.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you like the rye. It's my personal favorite too, just because it's from its complexity, and I love this with other spirits too, or even wine, right? Even like minutes later, right? And
Mhm.
hopefully you'll remember this in 5 or 10 minutes, right? Man, Martin told me I'm still getting aromas, right? I'm
Yeah,
still tasting the spirit, and
it
and it's
definitely
not
sticks
because
with
it's
you.
burning. It's not because it's burning my tongue or my throat, but it's because, right, all this complexity is still
Mhm.
is still coming from the back of your throat. So I just love the complexity of it.
It's more of and for me, usually with ryes, and this kind of comes into some of the 7 or 8 year old ryes that I've had in my in the past. There's an effervescence that comes sort of like from things that have a high mint content or peppermint content.
Hmm.
They have
Hmm.
that. It your brain can translate that as burn, like something that's really, really cold can have a burn, but it's more of an effervescence, almost like what's left behind after drinking something carbonated or whatever. Like there's just this thing that keeps happening, and you're exactly right. It stays there. I took my sip 2 minutes ago, 3 minutes ago, and it's still hanging out. It's still doing the same thing that it was doing all along. Um, who's the target consumer? Like, who are you after whenever whenever you build a brand? You're like, all right, I'm going to build a brand, but then you have to go through the not so fun part of like building the business plan for it. Like, who am I going to target? What's our expenses? All of these things. Like, who is the premier candidate for Bespoken Spirits right now?
Yeah, it's interesting, John. And there's something you mentioned. I'm not from the beverage industry. So when we started making spirits, right, we thought about, we'll just make the best spirits that are out there, right, and people are going to like it, right. And there's certainly a target group which is kind of more like, not sure this is fair to say, but it's probably more the younger consumer, right? People who also, if you kind of look at the SKUs that we have, right, people who want to try different things, right, who want to try a bourbon, who want to try a rye. So we're kind of looking for the sort of modern consumer that wants to explore, that wants to try, and who's also open to this whole thing about pairing with the food, whether it's with chocolate or with yeah, like we said earlier. Right. Next time you have a steak, right, I would definitely try to use it. Try it with a bourbon, and then maybe have a rye at home and just try both of them. Right, you don't have to get drunk, but just to get the experience to see, right, is the one that you prefer over the other. So we believe that sort of our target group, right, is more like let's call them the modern consumer, right? Somebody who's not been drinking every night the same kind of dram, right? But somebody who wants to try different things, and kind of enjoys that by doing so.
And that, did you do a ton? Did you have somebody like go out and do a ton of market research before you began, or you just had an idea and you ran with it?
We had an idea and ran with it.
So that was going to be my that was going to be my suspicion, because I would guess, and I appreciate the effort, and I think that there's going to be success here. But most market researchers would say that whiskey people are, if you're targeting whiskey as a marketplace, they're generally the ones that are less likely to move on new ideas. They're very set in stone, but younger consumers are absolutely that. They're open to change. They're open to pairing. They're open to do things completely different. So that's great to know. And, I read somewhere that you guys have a pretty good level of excitement that's happening in Asia. And, the people over there generally embrace technology more. They have less preconceived notions of what it should be. But the North American consumer is very much not like that. They're very stubborn, obstinate. I don't know what the right word is. But how do you get them? Is the bourbon, is this, straight bourbon, the chance, like, let's go get the stubborn Westerners?
Yeah, no, it's really about the taste, right? That's how you, at the end of the day, you can talk as much as you want, right? We can talk here for the next 3 hours, right? Till somebody really tries it, right, and compares it. Maybe bring it to a tasting with your friends, right? Like, I was yesterday in Austin, where somebody claimed, oh, I took this, right, and we had six different ryes, right, and they just felt this one was just amazing, right? So at the end, I believe we have to win the consumers over the taste, right? A part of course also about the sustainability part, right, where we even want to improve going forward, right? Do more towards that, and then to be more sustainable, and kind of it's from California. It's not your Kentucky rye or bourbon, but we believe there's definitely interest in the. And again, we're learning, right? And we now have a marketing team, which we didn't have at the beginning, right? So as we grow, and we also have to try things, right, to see what goes well. We're now doing a lot with on-premise, which again, right, was really a shame due to COVID, especially here in California, right? We're doing now much more wet tastings in other states. We still can't them do here, right? Florida, for instance, right, has been a success for us, and maybe also because of Derek Jeter, who lives over there, right, and this involvement. But wherever we can do the tasting with people, right, people realize how good the spirits are.
Okay, so you mentioned Derek Jeter. So is Derek Jeter? I know the answer to this, but I'm going to answer the question so you can answer it, because that's how these things always work, right? But so is Derek Jeter? Is he just a celebrity endorsement? Is he a partner? Is he a fan? Is he an investor? Like, what role does Derek Jeter play in this particular brand?
Yeah, he's an investor and fan. But he actually invested in the idea, and then what if I can, I'm sure not using his words, but what made him really excited about this was the customization possibility, right, for athletes, for artists, right, to be able to actually design their own spirits towards the liking what they actually want, right. So he's an investor in a couple of technology companies, and yeah, he liked what we are doing, right. I believe he's a moderate drinker, right. So that's why you won't see him kind of on a billboard or anything, right. That was never the idea, but so he's an investor in the company, yeah. And also a great businessman and advisor.
That does seem like a very shrewd business approach, in the fact that if a celebrity wants to get into whiskey, they have a couple of options. They either go to MGP or someone like that and buy already aged whiskey and put a blend together, throw their name on it, and market it out, or they start from scratch. And so now they're 2 to 4 years away from having any degree of cash flow, unless they want to sell a white spirit in the in between. And it happens pretty regular that celebrities want to get into spirits, whether it be, athletes or actors or whatever. But it's such a long game that you can start becoming concerned with your investment, with, is this a thing you still want to do? Anything can happen. But having a speed to market for people who are interested in investing like this, like, that's a really smart play. And so I knew that he was more of a business partner than he was just a celebrity endorsement. And those are a dime a dozen. There's a bunch of people that are out there throwing their name against a brand. There's a significant difference whenever there's money on the line, whenever that's a part of an investment strategy or a business growth for them. I like the idea. I like that a lot, is being able to put them in a position where they can build out a flavor profile that they like themselves and have it in the market in a relatively short amount of time to maintain their interest, to maintain their cash flow, whatever they need to do to be able to generate revenue, to see a return on it. Because at the end of the day, it's fun to make spirits, but you have to be able to make profit as well, or UNICEF isn't making whiskey. There's no nonprofits in the whiskey industry, and so you've got to be able to generate revenue. You have to do that. Let me go back through here now. So I came across a different thing, completely unrelated to whiskey, and I'm going to ask you this: live penalty.
Oh,
so tell me a little bit about live penalty, because this is super interesting. I want to hear about this.
Yes. So we started live penalty, and I'm only an advisor to the company anymore. But the basic idea was to bring the life experience, right, to anybody in the world, right? Athletes, right? Whether that's a soccer game, whether that's baseball, whether it's you're so limited, right, to a fan base of whoever is able to come to the stadium, right? And it actually was triggered by a project we had together with the Barcelona, right? With the idea of actually being able to capture live much more people, right, rather than just people watching it passively on TV, right? So what live penalty is, and we're currently, or the company focuses now primarily on soccer, right? It gives people all over the world, right, the possibility to play live, in this case against the goalkeeper. That's the first concept the company introduced, and yeah, we started that maybe like a year, and then even in parallel with Bespoken Spirits, and then together with my cousin, who is actually also Czech, and then they moved back to Prague. So the company is now in Prague. I decided I love, even though I shouldn't say this, but I love spirits more than soccer.
Uh-huh.
And so I decided to stick around, and please, give it a try. So what you can do is you can shoot a penalty, right, from your laptop, from your iPhone, whatever it is, live against the goalkeeper who is on stage, right, in Prague. And sometimes they do this also with, I know they did this with Sparta Prague. I believe they did something in Germany, and they're also working on Spain. I believe they've been just in Spain last week. So yeah. And again, I love the idea, right, of bringing together, right, through technology that we have today, right, to kind of bring the life experience to anybody in the world, right, to interact with the players, right, other than somebody in Japan, right, how can they ever, right, interact with Lionel Messi or whoever it is, right? It's really, really hard, and that was the idea behind live penalty.
Yeah, so I love the idea, and I mean, you're in the right country to love spirits more than soccer, right? Because we're not it's like American
Well,
football is not a huge thing. It's growing. It's a growing segment in the United States, but it's never been a super significant thing. So choosing spirits or whatever. And you're working as an advisor on that, so I don't want to spend too much time. But I came across it. I was like, this is the thing that if it makes it to other sports, like people will go nuts over this, like the ability to try to, try to put a pitch past a hitter or try to hit a pitcher, like any of these things, it's in basketball and football, like there's a ton of expandability here. So it was just a super interesting thing. There's not a necessity to spend a ton more time on it. I just wanted to ask you about it because I liked it a lot. So one other thing. So I read, I don't know if it's your website, another website, I did a bunch of research like I normally do, and, come across facts. So you're taking expired beer potentially and turning it into whiskey. Is this a thing?
Yes, yes, yes. No, and it was particularly a big thing, right, when the pandemic started, right?
Mhm.
Because as you know, there are tons of rules around how long you can keep beer, right? Especially in the on premise, right? So we had a couple of projects with different distilleries, and then I believe we made some beautiful whiskeys out of brands. One surprised me the most that I can't mention, but somebody said, "Oh yeah, I know this. This is a 12-year-old Glendronach, right?" I'm like, "Oh, interesting that you think this is a 12-year-old Glendronach," and it was literally made from. So either the guy,
Mhm.
yeah, anyway, didn't know what he was talking about, but no, we made some award-winning spirits from in parentheses wasted beer. And the idea was there was a big pile of beer, but
Mhm.
then some of the large producers, right, they have like 10%. It was shocking to me to hear how much waste beer they actually have, and especially some of the really, really big guys, because they're so about quality and consistency, and they have a significant amount, so like 10%. And this is like hundred thousands of barrels,
Yeah.
right, worth of beer that they have to dump, that they have to, yeah, get rid of. And the idea was, let's kind of up yeah, kind of upgrade that, right, that waste, and actually make spirit from it. But we're not the first, right, who have kind of tried to make distillate from beer, right? The beauty with our process was that we could convert this super quickly to a brown spirit, right? And we could play around and test around, right, how to distill, right? Because there's some people just hate any spirit that comes from beer, right? Because the hops is always there,
Mhm.
right? But then you can play around with the distillation process, and then also with the maturation process. And because we have these fast learning cycles, right, we were really, really able to make something beautiful.
So, and my dad started homebrewing beer 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Like when the home brewing trend hit the United States, he was one of the first people that was kind of a part of that. And, we've always had the conversation around major brewers don't ever get, like, the Budweisers of the world don't get enough credit, because at the end of the day, whether you like the beer or you don't, they pump out hundreds of thousands, if not millions of gallons of the same product. And generically, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, it tastes almost exactly the same. And keeping a flavor profile that similar over that long of a timeline is pretty tough to do, right? Like, this is a thing that whiskey can't get to, at least not reasonably. And it makes sense that there would be a ton of waste, because they're trying to get to a flavor profile. And if it's off, you dump it. There's nothing more you can do with it. It's beer. There's no way to potentially save it, or maybe you can, put it in a can and label it something new, put a new brand on it or whatever. But being able to turn it into something more valuable, whiskey or whatever else, is an incredible thing, going back to sustainability, or, impact on environment, not just wasting a bunch of resources that went into it. So you're in the spirits industry, you're making rums, and you're making whiskeys, and you're making all of these things. Are you looking at wine? Like, are you going to try to get into, can we age wine quickly or not? Because you mentioned wine, and you like wine, right?
I did. I have to admit, I do like wine. There are a couple of reasons why we didn't do wine. One was, for instance, every year you start with something different, right?
Mhm.
And your wine grapes are literally only available once a year, right? So the advantage we have, this kind of comes back to the learning cycles, right? You're still stuck with this 1 year learning cycle. And what is even worse, right? I'm not sure which one's actually worse, but at least as bad, is that every time you have a different quality of grapes, right? Because the grapes, the quality of the wine depends so much, right, on the quality of the grapes. Right, and if you ever talk to a winemaker, right, what stress they have to go through, when to pick the right time, and how they're freaking out when there comes rain and all these things at the wrong time of the year, right? They wish for rain in May, but then maybe actually before May, but then it's just a disaster. So the learning cycles are the challenge there. What we actually can learn for the aging of wine is all the things that I talked about, how to treat the wood, and how that impacts what actually comes out of the wood, right? What we're converting in the wood. So we do believe that at some point in the future, this might be a super interesting knowledge, again, because we have these super fast learning cycles, and because we have made 10,000s of different spirits in the past couple of years, right, which nobody has ever done, right? Nobody has as much data as we have, we believe, right, on how treating the wood, right, and all the actions that are happening. So we do believe that some of the knowledge, it's not going to be transferable one to one, but everything that is related to the wood, we believe so.
Mhm. So one of the big trends in bourbon whiskey right now is, cask finishing, finishing in wine barrels or whatever. Is that a place that you're intending to try to push in on and understand, chemically what's happening there with different cask finishes?
Yeah. We actually have a couple of customer projects. We have
Mhm.
not done it ourselves, but we had a couple of customers who wanted a sherry finish, right? Or we
Mhm.
just actually did a private labeling with a Cabernet Sauvignon, right, finish. And so
Okay.
definitely, definitely.
So what's something that you like, you haven't done yet, but you really are anticipating the ability to do? Like, and that, maybe it's a real broad question, and maybe you don't have an answer for that. Um, but I'm looking for something that you're just anticipating, like you're right on the edge of a thing, if you have one, that you can share.
I think it's really about American malt whiskies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe, and it's also relatively young. But we are making some. Not we. I mean, it's America. We're making some beautiful malt spirits, right? Whiskeys, and that's definitely something where we also want to see, right? How can we contribute, right? How can we change the flavor profiles that are out there? So like I said earlier, that's probably one of the next things, right, that we definitely want to get out, as a special release or in the near future.
I'm with you on that. I've said it a number of times on different episodes that I've had. I think, you know, we'll eventually hit a peak on the bourbon boom in the United States. You know, like eventually it'll happen. There was a boom for craft beer, and it peaked, and it's still here. It's not going anywhere, but the interest, the market share is decreased a little bit. You know, people aren't as passionate about it as they were in the scale that they were. Bourbon, that'll happen with, and I think that we're kind of in this juggling act between the next one being either rum or American single malt whiskey. And I think American single malts are winning right now. You know, they don't have a category definition. That's probably the one thing that sort of limits them. But you know, I'm glad to hear that, because now I'm going to put on my little radar to make sure I keep up with what Bespoken is doing. And whenever an American single malt hits, I know now I've got to go out and I've got to, you know, you got to take my paycheck again. You got to, you know, steal some of my money and see what you're doing, because, you know, I've got most of this, all of this behind me is bourbon, but over here, there's an entire shelf of American single malts, because I'm trying to keep up what's going on in that segment, because, you know, Scotch drinkers are one of the largest market segments in the world, period. And it's hard to get a Scotch drinker to drink bourbon or rye, but it's not hard to get him to drink an American single malt, because you're in a similar flavor profile. Aging methodologies are different, finishing methodologies are different, peating is different, because, you know, there is peat in the United States, but it's not the same as the peat that's in Scotland. And if you're going to use something else, or mesquite, or if you're going to use hickory or whatever, cherry, some folks are using cherry, there are ways we can put spins on it that make it very much a North American trend. But I'm with you. I think that's a good place to be, at least thinking about. And now I know, like I said, you're gonna have to take some of my paycheck again. I've got a shopping list now. I've got special batch, American single malt's eventually going to happen, and so I'm going to be anxiously awaiting seeing what's happening there. Is there something that I haven't asked? I've got one last question that I have, but is there something that I haven't asked you that you want to talk about?
I can't think of it.
Okay. So, kind of going back and getting an idea of the ethos of the brand, right? Like, so there's this quote on the website that you guys sort of began out of this idea of being puzzled why wine and whiskey prices are shooting up with age, right? And so you get like, let's get into this thing. As a brand, are you trying to create a premium spirit at a reasonable price, or is the target to create a standard whiskey at a reasonable price? Like, what is the initial impetus of Bespoken Spirits?
Might change over time, but the initial idea was really because we knew, right, to excite anybody, right, it had to be able to compete, right, with the best of the best out there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a premium premium category whiskey, right? We're also still relatively small, right, but hopefully as we grow, where we can also our cost structure will adjust, right? We hopefully might be able to add something in other categories, right, of the pricing band. But we originally, honestly, we kind of looked at who did we beat at competitions. Right, whether it was World Whiskies, whether it was San Francisco, right? We kind of looked at what are they priced at. So we kind of felt like, well, if we beat them, right, we should be able to price it around that area.
Well, so that generated one last question. I keep doing one last. So you've got a number of awards, and you know, awards are this thing that, you know, you can put on the label and then you talk about it, or maybe you don't talk about it. It's this weird place for a lot of brands. They don't necessarily know what they want to do with them. What is the award that you guys have received that was like, this is the one that we're the most proud of? Like, this is it. What's that award?
Oh my God. I probably have to mention at least two or three.
That's what, okay. Top five. How about that? Top five.
So of course, the very first one, right? The very worst first one where we submitted our original batch, which is the Black Label, where we submitted it and it won a gold medal at the World Whiskey Awards, World Spirits and Wine competitions in New York. So that was our very first one, right? So that one that just after mid blew us partially away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this was really the first external proof or the confirmation, right, that our original batch, right, the first whiskey that we felt like was good enough to kind of release. And so that one's super close to my heart. The second one is probably where we won the category winner for our rye whiskey at the World Whiskey Awards, which
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I hope it's also on your bottle. It's supposed to be on every bottle that goes out. And the third one is actually an award that was a connection out of all the double gold medals that we won in San Francisco this year. But we also got an award that was connected with, and actually I have it here on my table. I don't know if you can see
Mm-hmm.
this, but we actually got the Innovation Award of the industry from at the San Francisco World Spirits competition. That one made us super happy, and in particular because it was not just for innovation, but it was the combination of quality and innovation that made us super proud. So yeah, so these are the ones that stand out of the 125 that we have, I believe, as we're counting.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, and awards, if nothing else, they can be validation that you've been doing something right.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you think you're doing a thing well, right? And until your boss shows up, or until, you know, the local community that you work in recognizes you, you don't ever know. You only have your own impression. But when someone else says this is good, it's validation. It's pure and simple validation. And, you know, it's deserved. Like, if you get it, like, they're not handing these out for free. Like, this is not something that's like everybody gets a trophy, any of those things, especially around like an innovation award. And like, that's sort of the core of the brand at this point is built on the idea of innovation, and you're achieving that, and people are noticing that. And so there's a lot of congratulations that go into there. It feels very well deserved. That I don't have any more questions. So if you guys don't have anything, I'm probably gonna, you know, dump you into the green room, do my little closing, and then we can come back and wrap up. But I truly appreciate you guys for joining me, you know, answering questions. Some of them are, you know, odd and off the wall, and some of them are maybe too random or whatever. But I appreciate you being here this afternoon. But I'll give you an opportunity to close out, and then we'll finish up.
Yeah, John, thank you so much, right, for your time. Thanks for taking the time, right? And I think you had great questions. Was a great time, and I hope I'll be back when we have our first American malt whiskey.
Hey, absolutely. There is no question about a need for a return visit. I'm always appreciative whenever people are willing to join me. This is the entire reason that I started this. You know, like, I started it to excuse the whiskey bottles, but at the end of the day, I just wanted to have interesting conversations with interesting people. And, you know, this is about as interesting as it gets, you know, trying to hack the idea of traditional whiskey and what we all know to be true within the bourbon industry. It's super interesting. And so you ever want to like really nerd out and get into the details of it, call me back. We'll get on a live stream and we'll talk about it. Cause I will, you know, I usually have hours upon hours available to me just to talk about this stuff, because that's what I came here for. So thank you guys for joining me. I'm going to dump you out, do my closing. I appreciate it so much.
Same here.
Thanks for tuning in for this episode of the Embellish Podcast, a podcast that is focused on product stories, brand ambassadors, storytellers, any of those things. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you have to be consuming this on. If you hit me up on social media, on Twitter or Instagram using Embellish Pod, and you can give me a follow, and you'll always see what's going on around here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, account contact details, so forth. I'll be back again next week with another new offering for you. So until then, cheers, and thanks for hanging out.